Israel decides on a string of security measures in wake of the ongoing violence while placing physical barriers between Jewish and Muslim neighborhoods in Jerusalem as international efforts to end the tension increase. Egyptians go to the polls in long-delayed elections to elect the first parliament since 2012. And 3 months after the historical signing, today is Adoption Day when the Iran nuclear deal comes into effect.
The news today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. We're opening with news that just arrived. A relatively quiet day in Israel came to an end a few moments ago when shots were fired in the southern city of Beersheba. 5 people were reported injured and at least 1 attacker was shot. Details are still coming in. Right now we're going live to speak with Miki Rosenfeld, the spokesman of the Israeli police. Good evening, Mr. Rosenfeld. What can you update us for the recent developments in the southern city of Beersheba?
What I can confirm is that a few minutes ago in Beersheba, near the central bus station, 2 terrorists carried out an attack there. From what we know until now, 5 people have been injured, 1 critically, 2 seriously, and 2 moderately. Emergency teams are at the scene. Both terrorists were shot. 1 of them was killed, and the second one is being treated at the scene. At the moment, the area is cordoned off, and we're searching to make sure there's no further terrorists in the building. Heightened security at the moment in Beersheba, but we have confirmed a terrorist attack took place several minutes ago in Beersheba.
Mr. Rosenfeld, from the first, let's say, eyewitnesses that are pouring in and the information that is pouring in, it was something expected? People noticed it? People saw it coming?
There was heightened security across Israel today as we continued almost after 10 days of ongoing attacks. Jerusalem was relatively quiet with a minimum amount of incidents in Jerusalem. Heightened security continued in all central bus stations and train stations as well. That's part of the ongoing necessary measures. Unfortunately, as a result of, once again, seems to be 2 terrorists working together sporadically, looking to the Beersheba area central bus station, and the attack took place there.
Yes, Mr. Miki Rosenfeld, thank you very, very much for this update. Of course, we will continue talking and continue getting updates from you as well. And right now with me here in the studio, it's Itzhak Levanon, former Israeli ambassador to Egypt, Ambassador Levanon. Thank you very much for coming. And also Yoav Limor, military analyst for Israel Hayom, a daily newspaper. Good evening. So Yoav, let's try to understand. We were experiencing today a really relatively calm day. It's been maybe we can say thank you for all the efforts that the Israeli government is trying to do for the last few days, or is it the new laws, or what exactly?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to anticipate what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, looking at, we are all veterans of 2 intifadas in the past. You know, only when it ends, you know how it started and how it elaborated later. So I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We saw Saturday with 7 different attacks, and we saw Sunday with non-attacks up till 15 minutes ago in Beersheba. So it's hard to foresee what's going to happen, but we have to wait and see who's these terrorists, where they came from. But what I know is the area that is around Beersheba. Beersheba is south to Hebron. The area is south between Beersheba and Hebron has no fence. All of Judea and Samaria is separated from Israel by a fence, security fence. That area is fenceless. The Israeli government didn't find the funds to finish the fence, so all the illegal workers who come from, especially from Judea, come to Beersheba in that area with no legal rights to work in Israel. We saw a stabbing a couple of weeks ago in Kiryat Gat, not far away from Beersheba. Again, an illegal worker, Palestinian, came to Israel with no right to work in Israel, stabbed a family in their house. And currently we see that event in Beersheba a few minutes ago.
Yes.
I don't know where they came from, but it smells like something which came from that area, and Israel has to ask itself what it's going to do with it, because, just one sentence, yes, Lucy, I said it here a week ago, and I will repeat it. For 10 years now, there has not been a single case of a Palestinian with a work permit in Israel who carried a terror attack. All of the terror attacks which were carried within, it was an Israeli. East Jerusalem. He was not from the West Bank. He was from East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is an Israeli territory. From the West Bank, not even a single attack carried by a Palestinian with a working permit. That's the reason Israel didn't carry out yet a closure on the West Bank, because 110,000 Palestinians are working in Israel, bringing money to feed about 700,000 to 800,000 people daily. Yes. So we want to separate them from terror. If such events will get them closer. And one more word. Most of the events we saw in the past few days came from the Hebron area. Hebron is the most hostile city, the most Hamas favorite city in the West Bank, and Beersheba is close to Hebron, so it smells as the same thing.
Yes, because this is what's been happening exactly with the point that you just mentioned in the last few days. And Shai Ben-Ari right now here in Jerusalem reporting live. Shai, you were today in Hebron. You saw what is happening. Did you feel this atmosphere that we've been talking about, the, let's say, volatile atmosphere in Hebron?
Yes, well, there's obviously a very tense atmosphere currently in Hebron. There wasn't a lot of motion on the streets, let's say. The streets were very empty, and indeed you could feel the tension in the air. We spoke to members of the Jewish community in the old city of Hebron who, let's say, they have a lot of experience with violence in general and with tensions with the local Palestinian community in Hebron. Today was relatively quiet, of course, but there were no less than 4 incidents just over Friday and Saturday on the weekend. But most of these actually targeted members of the security forces in and around Hebron, not necessarily members of the Jewish community. Nevertheless, this, of course, is not an easy experience for them. Regarding this latest attack in Beersheba, we're talking about an event apparently with 8 injured so far. These are according to initial reports, with 1 in critical condition, 2 in serious, 2 in moderate condition, and 3 lightly injured. We're talking about apparently 2 attackers, 1 apparently already shot dead, the other caught. This, again, according to initial reports, we're talking about an attack that did happen inside the central bus station in Beersheba.
Yes, Shai, let's talk a little bit about the physical barriers between Israeli neighborhoods and Palestinian neighborhoods in Jerusalem. How does it work on the ground exactly?
Yes, I think that perhaps the most blatant example of what you just mentioned, barriers between one and, let's say, 2 neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, is right behind us here. We're talking about Jabal Mukaber. This is a neighborhood that is right immediately adjacent to a Jewish neighborhood called Armon Natziv. This is the beginning of Jabal Mukaber. Here you can see this temporary barrier, these slabs of concrete that were erected here. It actually says in Hebrew at the bottom of these barriers, it says temporary and mobile. These can be moved to any location the police see fit. These are intended to protect forces and citizens here. There is often a contingent of police forces stationed right here. This is, in fact, the entrance to the lower parts of Jabal Mukaber. You can also see concrete blocks down there, which are actually blocking the street from any vehicles passing into this area. This is perhaps one of the main exits through Jabal Mukaber into the rest of Jerusalem. Cars can go through other routes, but they can't go through this route. This basically directs the traffic of residents who want to leave the neighborhood through a certain exit. And basically at that exit, which remains open, the Israeli security forces perform very thorough security checks these days. And it has to be said, it seems that the security measures in Jerusalem have been fairly effective. The last successful stabbing in Jerusalem, the Jerusalem area, was last Wednesday. And in terms of this current terror wave, that's been a dramatic drop. Of course, we're seeing terror pick up in other areas, for example, the Hebron area, and tonight in Beersheba.
Yes, Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very much for this. Yoav, before I continue with you and with Ambassador Lebanon, let's see, Shai Ben-Ari spoke about Hebron, and we spoke here about Hebron. Let's see the situation in Hebron today.
The streets surrounding the Jewish quarter of the West Bank city of Hebron were mostly empty Sunday as we drove through. But these ancient alleyways have known their share of violence over the years and even the recent days. Terror waves like the current one have a tendency to evolve over time, and recently the focus of violence has shifted from Jerusalem southwards towards Hebron and its surroundings. 4 stabbing attacks occurred in this area over Friday and Saturday, and naturally this has caused concern among Jewish residents of the city.
We can feel that the incitement all around and the radical Islam and the anarchist movement did a change in the city. And in the last few days, we could see it's a shifting of the balance and more terror actions around the city of Hebron and inside the city of Hebron. After almost a month that the place was very quiet.
Most of the attacks that have occurred here since Friday have targeted members of the Israeli security forces, like those stationed behind me here. In fact, there's always a very large security presence here in Hebron to protect a Jewish community that numbers only around 700 people. There are around 200,000 Palestinians living here under semi-autonomous self-rule. Hebron is holy to both Muslims and Jews, as it is the location of the tomb of the patriarchs, the traditional resting place of the biblical Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Jewish community places the blame for the current situation on incitement coming from the Palestinian Authority. But representatives say communication is maintained with some of the local Arabs.
So with the Palestinian Authority, we have nothing to do. But with local Arab leaders, like sheikhs and heads of families, of clans, we do have connections, and we speak and we develop connections, and we try to build a future. If we go through this wave, a better future for this town.
Still, the atmosphere here Saturday night was openly hostile.
You could hear screams all around from the mosques, from the muezzins, screaming and shouting like insane persons, Allahu Akbar, and kill the Jews and all around. It was really, really something very, very special.
The Jews who choose to live here, despite the difficulties, do so for ideological reasons.
We're not walking in fear, we're walking with a sense of security and faith. This is a place where we believe we belong, and we're not letting fear overcome us.
If history is any indicator, the current round of violence will most likely not be the last.
Ambassador Lebanon, I want to approach you and ask you today, the government passed, let's say, a new suggestion, a new law to carry physical, let's say, search, yes, even on people who don't look suspicious. Is it something that is not going to eventually make things even worse after this wave of terror will end, after we will pass this? Everybody looks suspicious. You know, Jews and Arabs look the same.
Look, Lucy, the situation is really complex. And it is indeed correct that nobody can anticipate where will be the next attack and by whom and etc. On the other hand, a government who is responsible for the safety of its citizens, he cannot stay, cross hands and doing nothing. Now, this is not the law. This is an extension of an old law, and it goes for everybody, not necessarily profiling people, not at all. It will go for everybody. And they can stop it. They can stop it, in a mall. They can stop it in the street, etc. Definitely, they will have to do a few things because they will have to take into account a lot of sensibilities. I will give you just one. If you have a woman walking in the street and suddenly the policeman, he would like, to search her, he cannot do that, even if it's a woman, a Jewish woman, or an Arab woman, or any other woman. So he will have to call for a policewoman, to do the job. Now, this...
Yeah, but we have on the other side Middle Eastern Jews who look like Arabs. I cannot believe that I'm saying this sentence, but they look like Arabs. And, they might, even Jewish people might find themselves being humiliated with no reason.
Look, my understanding is they wanted, with this law to give, let's say, more room to the police in order, to search the people and try to find out if somebody is, for instance, on Friday night, if they will go for a pub or etc., and they will come with knives, etc. Definitely, this is going to have a negative effect because nobody would like to be stopped anywhere, whether it will be in the street or in the train or any other place, and to be searched by a woman or by a man or by anybody else. This is, you are going to harm the integrity of the people. But on the other hand, you have to understand that, look, this government has to do something in order to stop the
And on the other side, we are seeing what just happened a few minutes ago, and maybe this law can eventually prevent these kind of lone wolf attacks.
Yeah, I mean, always that will be the answer. Everyone who's concerned about democracies should be concerned about such measures taken by governments, and you touch the point. This wave of violence eventually, sooner or later, will be over, and we'll be stuck with such laws that will be, at the end of the day, used by police and other defense forces against whomever they decide, for whichever reason they decide. You don't want to find yourself in such a situation. Ambassador Lebanon doesn't want to find himself in such a situation. I definitely don't want to find myself on the wrong side of the law enforcement forces. So I think there are enough measures in the hand of the police currently and the IDF to stop, and the country can take, Israel can take additional measures, but you don't need to penetrate one's privacy, and that's doing something which is very, very fragile. Breaking it, I'm very much afraid, will be irreversible and stepping back at the situation that Israel is in now, in the Middle East.
What is the solution, you are?
Look, this decision has not been yet decided. You know, it will
Lucy,
go through
the solution is. I'm a defense expert, but I do not bear the responsibility. It lies upon the Prime Minister and the government and the heads of the army and Shabak, etc., etc. And we journalists must not forget that upon coming to advise others. But Israel is going only on the defense side, which means taking defense measures. That's good. That stops some of it. But at the end of the day, the first Intifada was stopped by the Oslo Accord, which ended with the Oslo Agreement. And the second Intifada stopped by Israel taking defense measures, but at the same time disengaging from Gaza. So at the end of the day, Israel will have to take some measures vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority and Abu Mazen. Now, Netanyahu has to do everything. He's going to Berlin this week to meet Angela Merkel and John Kerry. He has to do everything which is in capacity to meet Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and try to get with something outspoken in order to stop that.
And the French today just suggested some kind of...
that won't work. That won't work.
For
Israel
an international
won't let
force
it happen.
to go to the Temple Mount and try to calm things down, but Israel is saying, no. In this way, you are actually putting the blame only on one side, and this is not fair.
Look, Lucy, it's very hard, to understand the role of the French government. More specifically, the foreign minister Fabius. We have seen it in the past, in the near past. He wanted, to take some decision by the Security Council against the settlements. He wanted, to limit, let's say, the discussions concerning a possible solution, between us and the Palestinians. And now we would like to put some observers. In one of the pictures, when we saw now, the pictures coming from Hebron, you saw there the observers, the TIPH. We have them, for several years. They do nothing. They just, write reports and they send it over, to the people. So this is not the solution. Regarding the law, this new law that it has been presented, yet is not have been adopted yet. But the problem is, and here the real problem with the democracy and with the integrity of the person and the right of a civil person, is that you are leaving the judgment to the policeman. He will decide to stop or not to stop you. This is impossible in a democratic system.
We started talking about the diplomatic efforts. Let's see what Eli Ochenberg looking at the diplomatic efforts and if they can just find some kind of a solution to this.
The volatile security situation in the Jerusalem Temple Mount compound, which ignited the recent upsurge in violence, has once again triggered an international desire to get involved in trying to find a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But as the old phrase says, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Only Israel alone, is the guarantor of the holy sites on the Temple Mount. The reason the status quo has been violated is not because we changed it. We didn't change anything. Israel is not the problem on the Temple Mount. Israel is the solution.
According to French diplomats cited in Le Figaro, France is pushing for a presidential statement on behalf of the UN Security Council that calls for international observers to be deployed at Jerusalem's holy sites, namely the Flashpoint Temple Mount Noble Sanctuary, to ensure the status quo is maintained. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected time and again any claims that Israel is seeking to change the status quo, stressing it is nothing more than a Palestinian lie exploited for propaganda. But it's not only France which is attempting to help break the cycle of escalation.
Later this week, I will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu because he will be in Germany and I'm coming through at that moment. We will meet there. And then I will go to the region and I will meet with President Abbas and I will meet with King Abdullah and others.
Kerry and Netanyahu will meet later on this week on Wednesday in Germany. There are still no specifics on the whereabouts of the Kerry-Abbas encounter. Meanwhile, and despite the differences, Washington and Jerusalem continue their defense-related cooperation.
Through all of the ups and downs in a family relationship, the military-to-military relationship has remained strong.
On Sunday, the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staffs arrived in Israel for a visit which Israeli ambassador to Washington Ron Dermer said would include discussions over an American aid package to Israel, discussions which were suspended by Netanyahu while contesting the Iran nuclear deal.
The challenges that we face together, and I have the same confidence you do that eventually we'll be successful. But that won't be without a lot of hard work and without a lot of integrated planning and having a common understanding.
The deal is a 10-year aid package that will extend the current $3 billion annual American defense grants to Israel.
Yes, and to our viewers who are just joining us, we are reporting about a shooting in the southern city of Beersheba. For now, we are reporting about at least one person that got killed, probably one of the terrorists, 2 people in critical condition, 2 in moderate condition, and 1 is still in a light condition. We've been talking about the efforts. We've been talking about the diplomatic efforts that it seems that both sides are not even interested, or it's very convenient, this status quo situation for Benjamin Netanyahu and also for Mahmoud Abbas.
Yes, but they're, in a way, not doing their job. I mean, they were elected to solve problems, not to deepen them. So both of them aren't currently doing what they should have been doing, which is to get both sides out of it. And more than both of them, the Americans are betraying their job. They should mediate between both sides. John Kerry is coming to Amman and not visiting Jerusalem, which is 40 kilometers away, 15 minutes flight away from Jerusalem, because he's afraid of coming here.
He's a little bit afraid.
I'm not even joking. He's meeting Benjamin Netanyahu in Germany, not even trying to get both sides to meet in such a critical time. The Americans are fed up. You can blame Netanyahu, you can blame Obama, but this administration has made each and every mistake in the Middle East, in Egypt, supporting the Islamic Brotherhood and not Sisi, in Syria portraying all the red lines and not obeying them, in Iraq, wherever you look, they made a mistake. In Saudi vis-a-vis Iran with the agreement in Iran, and now they're doing the same mistake with Israel and the Palestinians. It will backlash to Israel and the Palestinians and the Americans, and it strikes me. I don't understand their attitude, their diplomacy.
Just explain to me. Just a few weeks ago, there was a try from ex-minister Mayor Shitrit to try and meet, to arrange a meeting between Mahmoud Abbas and between Benjamin Netanyahu. The 2 sides actually agreed to meet, and then the Americans came and they said, no, we don't want you to meet yet. So I don't understand this approach about blaming the Israelis, blaming the Palestinians, but from the other side, you're telling them, no, we don't want you to meet.
Blaming should not be a policy, because it will lead us, to nowhere. But let me tell you, I think, objectively speaking, I think that Bibi Netanyahu has an interest to meet with Abu Mazen, because he
wanted to meet Mahmoud Abbas, according to the last report.
From his own interest, he would like to meet him because he can go, in a photo op and say, look, I am in touch. I called him. I met him. I say I am ready to resume the negotiations without any precondition. Whenever he can build up, score some point for himself. On the other side, I think that President Mahmoud Abbas is not interested in that, because he understands that such a meeting cannot will not lead, let's say, to the acceptance by Netanyahu of all the conditions of Mahmoud Abbas. So he will have whether to choose or to clash with Bibi Netanyahu or to make some concessions, which he's not ready to do it, or probably he is not even able to do it. So he says, I'm not going to meet him. It will be useless because I can do nothing with that.
You know, I'm trying to think, because if the two sides are just waiting for someone to just put the keys on the table and say, okay, I'm retiring from this, it's not going to happen anytime soon, because although Mahmoud Abbas...
Who's going to take care of that? Who's going to take care of 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank and 8 billion Israelis? There is no way to retire from that. Someone has to deal with that. I mean, that's why we elected Prime Minister, we've elected Benjamin Netanyahu. That's why the Palestinians elected Abu Mazen, although it was 10 years ago. But that's what. Again, one should be furious with the Americans. I mean, we heard their the State Department announcement saying that, you know, looking at the stabbings as if it's rain. I mean, look how police forces are dealing with people who shoot in America. What do they expect? What do they expect of the Israeli Defense Forces to do in Israel? That's infuriating. That's not a way to behave. That's not a way to talk about a democracy. That's not a tennis game that they're watching and the ball is going from here to there. There are lives of people on the line, and Israel currently is defending itself. And if the Chief of Staff, the American Chief of Staff, is in Israel, talking of Israel as its best friend, best ally, I can't see at the same time the State Department talking as if we're some remote person that they happen to know.
Not only remote, the State Department was mumbling during this statement. They were like not even able to find the words to say the condemnation against Israel or against the Palestinians. But how much it's connected to the actual relationship between the two men, between the two leaders.
It is irrelevant. It is irrelevant at this stage, because we have to face it. You cannot count now on this administration, because this administration decided to take a different path. I mean, they decided. They have the right to decide. This is the biggest country in the world. You know, this is the leader of the world. So they say, okay, I'm fed up, you know, with the Israelis and the Palestinians. I have other things to do. And this is why I'm mumbling, I'm doing anything else. But I don't think that the Israelis and the Palestinians, and I'm talking about the Israelis, they can, you know, count on the Americans to go back and to be the fair, you know, to intervene between us and the Palestinians in order to reach something.
What's going to happen? Like in Syria, Ambassador Lebanon, the Russians will come. That's better for the sides? That's better? That's what the Israelis and the Palestinians want?
Look, the problem is not with us.
There is no
The problem is with the Americans.
Okay.
The Americans are not
what I said before, they are betraying their job.
You know,
Obama is tired, and he has other things to deal with. Look, the question with Iran now...
He was not tired in Cuba a month ago or in Iran three months ago. I don't take this excuse. He doesn't want to deal with Israel, and him and Benjamin Netanyahu both went on too high trees, and that's a tragedy. Yes. That's our tragedy.
They climbed on a high tree, very high tree. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for being with me in this part. We're going out for a small break, 2-minute break, and then I'll be back with more updates about the latest developments here in the region. Don't go anywhere. 5 people are injured, one of them critically, in 2 separate incidents in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel. At least one of the terrorists was killed, the other was severely injured. Egyptians go to the polls in a long delayed elections to elect first parliament since 2012. And 3 months after the historical signing, today is Adoption Day, when the Iran nuclear deal comes into effect. Welcome back to the news today. Egyptians headed to the polls today for the parliamentary elections, meant as the last stage in the country's democratic evolution. But critics accuse President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi of cracking down on political opponents and civil society, leaving many Egyptians wondering whether freedom can truly be won through the ballot box. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblizer has more.
Security forces were on high alert Sunday as Egyptians went to the polls to vote in long-awaited parliamentary elections.
After what we've been through, we have to all come down here and unite. Even if we disagree, we cannot disagree over Egypt.
The country has had no parliament since June 2012, when a court dissolved the chamber, then dominated by the Muslim Brotherhood. 1 year later, Army Chief Abdel Fattah el-Sisi ousted President Mohamed Morsi, effectively reversing the results of the revolution that ended Hosni Mubarak's decades-long rule. Sisi, now Egypt's leader, has described the election as a milestone in his roadmap to democracy.
I, and in a direct form, call on all Egyptians to go to polling stations and to strongly assemble to achieve our last demand that we've agreed on. For the sake of the country, celebrate choosing your representatives, and choose well.
But critics remain unconvinced, accusing Sisi's government of a widespread crackdown on civil liberties and of imposing unilateral diktats.
Definitely, the main problem facing the incoming parliament will be the laws that were issued in the absence of a legislature. We have more than 500 laws that were issued during the reigns of Mohamed Morsi, Adli Mansour, and Abdel Fattah el-Sisi.
The voting will take place over 2 rounds, culminating November 22nd and 23rd, with runoffs planned in constituencies with no clear winners. Preliminary reports suggest a low voter turnout, in sharp contrast to the long lines that formed during the last election in 2012.
I won't vote this time. Why? Because 3/4 of the candidates in our district were elected during Mubarak's presidency. They didn't do anything they promised. We will never see these people when the elections end, and our problems won't be solved.
With the Islamists sidelined and the secular opposition fractured, many are expecting a rubber-stamp parliament to be voted in. Speculation is already rife that the new body will seek to amend the constitution to concentrate authority in Sisi's hands. After 4 years of instability, including 2 popular upheavals, Egypt may be on the verge of coming full circle, once again ruled by a military strongman.
And with me right now from Egypt via Skype is Jacob Vilschefter, I24 News contributor. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Jacob, let's try to understand, because we've been hearing, let's say, a lack of, if I can say, loyalty, or I can say lack of trust between the Egyptians and the Egyptian government. How much do the Egyptians really believe that these elections are actually democratic?
So look, there are 90 million Egyptians, so I can't summarize what all of them think.
Yes.
We have turnout that doesn't look all that impressive for the first days, but as they say, there's always Bukra and there's always Ba'ad Bukra, because there's a second round in November. Look, if the litmus test for this election is that the Muslim Brotherhood has to participate, well then, the government here has failed. They are running an election without the Muslim Brotherhood. But there is an election here, and it is contested by a religious party, the Salafi Noor party, and by about 5 or 6 different secular parties, and a mix of special interest group parties. So if the litmus test is that you're going to have a multi-party election, that's what's happening in Egypt this month.
Yes, unfortunately, we still are here talking and reporting about the developing story. So, Jacob Vilschefter, thank you very, very much for giving us this information. And we're moving to Europe, where efforts are still underway to resolve the flow of migrants into the continent. German Chancellor Angela Merkel visited Turkey today to include the country in the European effort, but President Erdogan says Europe woke up too late. Meanwhile, migrants from the Middle East and Africa are faced with internal borders within Europe, forcing them to find new ways to get to their most desired destination, Germany. I'm at 6 has more.
Is a new frontier shaping up in the European effort to cope with the migration crisis? German Chancellor Angela Merkel arrived in Istanbul today for talks with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. Merkel's visit comes at a time of uneasy relations between Turkey and other members of the EU. On Friday, the Turkish president said that the European Union had taken too long to realize how important Turkey is to resolving the European migrant crisis, adding that the stability of Europe depends on the stability of Turkey.
Erwarten wir, und das ist ja auch in dem Migrationspapier zwischen der
There is an agreement on migrants between Turkey and European Union, and this holds true for third countries as well. But of course, visa liberalization and readmission agreements should also go into effect. Another issue is to share the burden.
This week saw neighboring Hungary close its border with Croatia in an effort to block the migrant route to Austria and onward to Germany. The most powerful economy in the EU made promises of accepting exceptionally large numbers of migrants, a move that has turned its neighbors into transit stations for those hoping to escape war and persecution elsewhere. Slovenia, for one, is not wasting any time in preparations.
The government has decided to include the army in helping police. Army personnel and army equipment will be used to secure the state border. It is important that we reinforce the police with army personnel who will provide support with transport and surveillance in border areas.
In Slovenia today, hundreds of migrants are being processed after arriving from Croatia. They were diverted here by Croatian authorities in response to Hungary closing its border with the country. For the ones who made it here, the journey into Europe is underway. But it's difficult to estimate what will happen with 700,000 more migrants estimated to reach Europe's shores from Africa and the Middle East this year.
Yes, and before we will continue with the story about the migrants, just a quick update. One Israeli was killed. At least 4 people were injured earlier this evening in 2 separate attacks in the southern city of Beersheba when 2 terrorists opened fire at the city central bus station. One of the terrorists was shot dead at the scene. The author was severely injured. Reports from the scene say the terrorists also stabbed some of their victims. The 2 terrorists arrived together at the station but then split up and began their attacks in different parts of the building. And I want to continue and go back to the migrant crisis. Laura Wales is right now with us. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
You know, Laura, I think that since the first time that we spoke about this crisis, we spoke about the migrant crisis, we spoke about the fact that Turkey is just dealing with this more than any other European country. And when Erdogan is saying that Europe woke up too late, it woke up almost 2 years too late.
Certainly, Erdogan has been very critical of the EU for not accepting Syrian refugees or other refugees until now. He has really had a position of power with the EU. This might help him in the upcoming November 1st elections, or I should say not him himself, but his party that he co-founded, which is now trying to get a majority, which it failed to get on June 7th.
Yes.
And certainly seeing Angela Merkel agreeing to reopen a chapter this year is pretty amazing. So this is a real, she was for so long against the EU, Turkey joining the EU, change in her position.
Yes, Laura Wales, thank you very much for this quick update. And we are going back to the developing story here in Israel. We've been reporting about at least 1 Israeli that was killed in the last shooting attack in the southern city of Beersheba when 2 terrorists just entered to the central bus station when they then committed 2 separate attacks. And of course we are continuing to report about this developing story in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel. Again, 1 Israeli were killed and 4 people were injured. And right now we're continuing to Syria. Syrian forces and their allies, backed by Russian air power, are engaged in a major offensive to retake parts of Aleppo. This comes as the tide may be turning against the Islamic State in neighboring Iraq. I-24 News correspondent Charles Bibelzer has the details.
The Syrian army is on the march towards Aleppo. Bolstered by Iranian and Hezbollah troops and boosted by Russian air cover, forces loyal to President Bashar Assad are attempting to buttress the regime by retaking parts of what was once the country's biggest city.
The leaders and the fighters of the resistance spend their youth, 30 years, on the border with Palestine, and they have now gone to the borders of Syrian provinces of Hama, Idlib, Latakia, and Aleppo.
Full control over Aleppo and its surrounding areas would provide a buffer for Assad's coastal Alawite stronghold, where Moscow's military assets, including its naval port in Tartus, are located. The offensive is one of several assaults against rebel fighters since Russian jets began carrying out airstrikes in Syria on September 30th. Despite accusations from the West, the Kremlin continues to deny its efforts are aimed at entrenching Assad's rule.
Absolutely not true. It is up to the Syrian people to decide who will be the head of Syria. At the moment, we are operating on the premise that Assad is the legitimate president.
While Washington and Moscow have begun coordinating their respective bombing campaigns in Syria, stark differences remain over Assad's role in any future political process.
Where we will continue to differ is in the basic set of principles and strategies we're pursuing inside of Syria.
Meanwhile, progress against the Islamic State is being made in neighboring Iraq. The army, backed by Shiite militia fighters, reportedly captured most of the strategic Baji oil refinery, as well as parts of nearby Baji town, both under IS control since June 2014.
The battle is successful in all facets. The enemy has lost so many lives and equipment. More than 900 fighters were killed and more than 2,000 were injured.
The Iraqi military is also preparing for a major assault on Ramadi, which fell to the IS in May. The terror group currently controls about 1/3 of Iraq's territory.
And with me right now here in the studio is Ali Waqt, senior Middle East analyst. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me. It seems that, let's say, the Russian intervention, if we can call it, is working.
For the moment, it is working, Lucy, with no doubt. The question is whether the international coalition will prepare something, or the famous trap everybody has been talking about in the last days, because the Russians are also hinting, not they are only achieving results on the ground, but they are also hinting how come for more than 1 year the very tremendous international coalition did not achieve anything in the war against the Islamic State. Now we have two answers. First of all, the Russians are not focusing on the Islamic State. They are keeping the Islamic State for the last part, because they know that the international community will gather in order to fight the Islamic State. For now, they are fighting those who are considered by the United States as the moderate rebels, in spite of the fact that the Americans, Russians, French are not appreciating that the strikes of the Russians are for the moment targeting the Free Army and other moderate rebels group. But we can talk about now the beginning maybe of a turnover in this conflict, because after small villages in the Alawite part of Syria, we are now talking about Aleppo and a campaign that is targeting the most important Syrian city after Damascus.
I don't want to say they're preparing the best for the last, but is it maybe it's part of the strategy that Russia is conducting in the region? Maybe Russia doesn't want to show all its force focusing on IS, and at the end of the day to say, you know what, we will show you how it's done, and maybe the price that they will get, or the prize that they will get, will be bigger.
I think that this is what they are planning. Now, whether it will happen on the ground or no, we should wait for the coming weeks, Lucy. But the Turkish took the Islamic State in order to strike and to hit the Kurds. And this is exactly what the Russian did, but with major force. They used the Islamic State in order to strike against the Syrian opposition. And now, for the first time, we are hearing the regime is advancing in a region that were for 2 years and even more in the hand of the rebels group. And of course, with the role that is played by the Iranian Revolution Guard, we can say that the equation for the first time is leaning towards the Syrian. Now, the question whether the Saudis and the Qataris and the Americans succeed to bring anti-missile, anti-crafts and anti-tanks missiles to the rebels when it will come really to the center of Aleppo.
Yes, Ali Wakad, thank you very much for this. 11 Syrian and Iraqi refugees, including 4 children, were rescued by a group of Israelis on a yacht near the Greek coast this morning. Upon learning their rescuers were Jews from Israel, those rescued began to kiss and thank them. And after providing the refugees with first aid, the Israelis notified Greek authorities. And right now, Gal Baruch is one of the rescuers joining me via Skype. Good evening. Thank you very, very much for joining me. So just try to describe to me what happened and how it got to the point that you are actually rescuing and understanding that you are dealing with refugees from Syria.
Oh, hi. We've been on our way to Castello Rizzo in Greece and the way back to Israel, and in 7:30 in the morning, we heard, like shouting, yelling, for help. We thought this is a divers, they just one of the divers got, away from his friends and feel, like in danger and screaming. So we didn't think twice. We just got over, towards him, and we picked him up and bring him up on board.
You are hearing, when they are hearing that you are Jewish, that you are Israelis, what was the reaction? How they reacted to the fact that the two of you are actually enemies?
I don't think, this question rises up because they've been so shocked and they was very happy, and they hug us and kisses us and thankful, and we got them some, like hot tea and some cookies and stuff.
After you're saying that you gave them cookies, and basically what I'm seeing, and from the footage that I saw, I see 2 people, 2 human beings actually helping. One is need the help, and the other one is actually giving it to him, no matter what the religion, no matter what the race is. How do you feel about that? Did you even imagine one time in your life that you will meet a Syrian and you will give him help?
This really was unexpected, and it never happened, and we were a little bit, nervous at the beginning, but the question, like to rescue people, in danger of life, it's no question about it.
Nir Cohen, I will just say thank God and thank you to your friends that you were there and actually were able to save these people. Thank you very, very much. Yes, and from the refugee crisis to a solution, you can say it's adoption day of the Iranian nuclear deal signed between world powers and Tehran last July. The landmark agreement is officially starting to roll and become reality. What is going to happen now and what is expected until the actual implementation? Eli Ochenberg explains.
3 months and 4 days ago, over 2 years of negotiations came to a jubilant conclusion when world powers and Iran did the unimaginable and agreed on the landmark nuclear agreement. Sunday is the day the accord is officially adopted, only one step before the actual implementation phase, which means both sides must start delivering on the promises they made in July. For Tehran, this means giving the UN nuclear watchdog enhanced access to its nuclear facilities. In addition, Iranian nuclear engineers are due to begin dismantling 12,000 nuclear centrifuges, taking out the core of Tehran's main plutonium reactor, Arak, and shipping 98% of its nuclear stockpile, more than 12 tons of low-enriched fuel, out of the country. But no sanctions relief will be granted Sunday. For the US and Europe, Adoption Day means preparing for the lifting of sanctions. US President Barack Obama is expected to issue a presidential memorandum guiding his administration to get ready to meet its commitments. The EU is obliged to begin the process of ending its sanctions on Iran. But actual sanctions relief will begin only after December 15, the due date for the IAEA to provide its final assessment of Iran's nuclear program. If the organization verifies that Iran has met its obligations, then, according to assumptions, within the first quarter of 2016, implementation day will take place. On that day, the UN terminates nuclear-related sanctions on Tehran, the EU terminates or suspends a range of Iran nuclear-related sanctions, including financial and energy sector sanctions, and the US stops enforcing sanctions related to the Iranian financial and energy sector, removes a number of individuals or entities from the SDN list, which lists the vassals whom United States citizens and permanent residents are prohibited from doing business with, and terminates executive orders related to Tehran. Altogether, it is assumed that the international community will release Iranian assets worth approximately $100 billion. On Monday, a joint commission of the P5+1 and Iran will hold its first meeting in Vienna. This forum was agreed upon under the July Accord and will be a permanent body to discuss technical matters, sanctions relief, and how to monitor Iran's commitments. In any case, the landmark agreement is turning Sunday from a historic diplomatic achievement into history in the making.
And with me right now here in the studio is Mayor Javed Anfar, Iran political analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, first stage, Adoption Day, it came. We've been talking about this at least since this channel was born, and now this is it. What does it mean?
It means that we now have the proof is in the pudding, as they say. We have to see what happens over the next 2 months. But let's just talk about something that already happened, which was last week. The Revolutionary Guard tested a missile that they're not supposed to have tested, according to the United Nations resolutions.
In Arabic, we say, Allah yabashrak bil khair. God just continue to, that you will bring us good news.
Yes, well, I have to say that actually the biggest target of that missile was President Rouhani more than anybody else. They're very angry that he agreed to curb some of Iran's missile capabilities. The head of the commander of the Revolutionary Guard described the nuclear agreement as fitna, something which all the Arabic viewers and Muslim viewers understand. Fitna is when they rose against Islam, and basically he saw that as a coup d'etat against the regime. The nuclear agreement, this is the commander of the Revolutionary Guard. So this is already, President Rouhani is in a very tight spot, but they will, I think, deliver over the next 2 months because they can't live with the sanctions.
But you know, seeing this move happening just 2 weeks before Adoption Day, just 2 weeks before this agreement is supposed to be implemented.
It's going to bring them new sanctions by the UN.
What will happen exactly?
Well, but the UN has to decide. But it goes to show, again, it goes to show the balance that Ayatollah Khamenei has to play.
And it shows, again, the lack of trust that the international community has towards Iran. And more than that, maybe all the people that said that this deal is a really bad deal, they are right.
But this wasn't covered by the deal. The missile test was more related to United Nations resolutions than the deal. I think, yes, of course, it doesn't show good faith that they're doing something like this. But the biggest victim of this is Rouhani. It goes to show how much they don't trust Rouhani, how much they don't want Iran to come out of the isolation. Because right now, Lucy, in Iran, there's a very big discussion. There's two narratives. One is for Iran to stay a revolutionary state, one stay Islamic revolution, the other is to become Islamic Republic. Rouhani wants Iran to become Islamic Republic to transition. But the Revolutionary Guard and Supreme Leader, I don't think, wanted to leave the revolutionary status.
And again, one state, two messages. You know, it seems familiar. Just this one state, two kind of messages. Mayor Javed Anfar, thank you very much for this. And we're going right now live to Jerusalem with our military correspondent, Shai Ben Ari. Shai, please update us with the latest developments in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel.
Yeah, so in the past few minutes, reports coming through that of the injured, of the victims of this attack, one person has now died of his injuries, apparently a youth around the age of 20. 7 other people injured, including 2 others in serious condition and 4 others in medium condition. Apparently, the assessment at this stage, we know that the attackers used knives and also a firearm. The assessment is that one of the attackers, there were 2, managed to steal a firearm from a soldier who was on the scene and use it to injure and kill the people around him. So we're talking about a very serious attack, one of the more serious attacks, of course, during the current terror wave in the central bus station in Beersheba.
Yes, Shai, we also hear some reports that there is some kind of pursuit after the car that the 2 attackers were driving in.
Yes, these are unconfirmed reports at this stage. There's a certain, perhaps, suspicion that perhaps somebody who was involved in bringing the terrorists to the scene was able to escape in a taxi, but this is unconfirmed at the moment by authorities. This is a suspicion that is currently the state, and there is a pursuit after a taxi cab, but that is not confirmed by any of the authorities yet.
Yes, Shai, I want to again take you back to the situation in Jerusalem and how the people in Jerusalem are experiencing this, maybe the separation wall that everybody is talking about, maybe, or a separation fence should also be in the north, although we heard that the government is approving a fence or a bigger fence between Israel and the Gaza Strip.
Right, well, you know, what we see behind us here is something short of a fence, I would say. We're talking about a certain barrier meant to protect not only citizens, but also members of the security forces who are often stationed at this intersection, which is right at the meeting of Jabal Mukaber and Armon Hatziv, a nearby Jewish neighborhood. So first, it has to be noted, the actual security fence passes not far from here. And that is more than a fence. It is a security barrier, as Israel defines it, basically a wall that divides parts of this city and indeed the West Bank from Israel proper. So we're talking about yet another sort of barrier, as well as other blockades that have been set up in recent days here in this Jerusalem neighborhood, as well as others.
Yes, a country under a blockade. Shai Ben-Ari, thank you very, very much for this. We're going out for a small break. An update from our news desk. We will update you with the developments in the region, and then we will be back for the 3rd part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the news today. We are still here on I-24 News reporting about the ongoing event happening in the southern city of Beersheba, where one Israeli at least was killed in the attack, and at least 6 people were injured. With me right now here to continue discussing about the situation and maybe the deterioration in the situation are Eran Zinger, Middle East editor in Israeli Public Radio.
Hi.
Good evening. And also Dr. Hani Zubaydah, political science at the Israel Valley Academic College. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. We've been talking until today about stabbing. We've been talking about today about people going on the streets, taking a knife and killing people. Now we've been talking about arms. We're talking about guns on the streets of Israel, and this is another level.
Well, I think, if I may speak for those of us who are in the midst of things, we knew that at a certain point it will deteriorate to weapon arms. We knew that guns will be involved. In few of the incidents, the police was afraid that there was a bomb inside the cars or on the person himself. Tonight it broke loose in Beersheba. I think what we need right now, and I might be speaking for myself and not for everyone, what we need right now is a sound leadership. We need to see both from the Arab side, the Israeli Arab Palestinian side, and the Israeli Jewish side, leaders that will take responsibility and will calm the situation down, because right now what we're seeing, in my point of view, are 2 different processes. One is an escalation of personal security to a level that I do not recall in Israeli history, and I mean within the Israel, other than the first and the second intifada, mostly the second intifada. And the other one, and that I'm trying to pick my words, is kind of like a movement toward a fascist, semi-fascist regime in which we see military all over, we see a huge amount of nationality on the streets, and we see hatred of the other to an extent that I do not remember in Israeli history. And these two combined together are very extremely dangerous processes for democracy.
I totally agree. I totally agree. First of all, on the first level, when it comes to the relations, or what used to be the relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, questions are being asked right now on the Palestinian side. Where is it taking us, this new intifada? Because let us remember that the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, has achieved a lot. Only a few weeks ago, we saw the Palestinian flag in New York. Yes. And what will eventually happen with all this intifada happening? Will it serve the interests of the Palestinian people? And the answer to the question right now, and we're starting to see it right now, a well-known Palestinian journalist called Darame was asking the question today: how can it be? It's taking us to the wrong direction.
I want to take you, even because you are going through the Arab media, and we are hearing more and more voices in the Arab world saying that this way is not the way, and the Arab world is not supporting the current wave, the current violent wave that is coming from the Palestinians. And more than that, they don't even want to intervene because they're saying, you know what, you got into this mess alone, now solve it, because we are not part of it.
With all due respect, the number one problem of the Arab world today is not the Palestinians, it's Syria. What's going on right now in Syria is a war of the Arab world against the extremists, or the ones who are led by the Iranians and the ISIS. And the Palestinians would be considered as the ones who are stopping it, who are making a mess of all things, instead of keeping quiet right now and helping this world, or the United States-led coalition against ISIS work in Syria. This might be the problem. This might be the obstacle. Another thing is, when I go back to Israel, and Hani's just mentioned it, the relations between Jews and Arabs inside Israel. Well, there's a wall that is now being built.
Literally.
A wall of questions. People are terrified from both sides. I went to Akka a few days ago. I saw what happened there. No Jews visiting Haifa. No Jews visiting Akko. Rarely. You could not have noticed any Jew in Nazareth, the largest Arab city.
Also here in Jaffa. Yes. Also here in Jaffa.
But the thing is, and many Israelis don't take it under consideration, is that Arabs are not buying at Jewish businesses anymore.
So maybe it's about time that we will stop calling this a wave of terror, a wave of violence, and maybe it's about time that we will call the child in his own name. This is a war, or this is an intifada.
Let me put another thing on the table with your permission. This time, I don't know about the latest action in Beersheba. All of the terrorists, all of them, came from within the Israeli state. All of them are Israeli citizens. This is something completely new. Now, while I agree with Iran, the notion is that right now what's going on in Israel...
citizens or not?
Well, they're either citizens or they're residents of East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem. Yes, some of them were citizens as well.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is right now, and when Iran spoke about a wall, we should mention that only today they erected a wall in Jerusalem, in Shchunat Armon HaNatziv, between them and Isawiyah, if I'm not wrong. And they decided to erect Jabal Mukabbar, I'm sorry.
Yes.
They erected a wall. But with all due respect, walls do not help. Erecting a physical wall will not stop this. Right now, what we need to understand that this is somewhat an inner Israeli problem. It became an issue. While the Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas is trying...
playing a game. They're not playing a role in this.
Exactly. It can try as much as he wants. His ability to control these people is much weaker than to control the Palestinians themselves who are on the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. This time, it's a whole different game. Now, the thing is, and I'm trying not to use the words intifada or war, and I'm trying to be very calculated in the way.
Wave of violence.
Exactly. Now, they're saying wave of violence, but we have to remember that this wave of violence is running underneath the foundations of the Israeli democracy. What we saw today from Israeli legislators, from mayors, from public figures is not helping the situation. Vice versa, it's going and putting things.
So I want to go. So I want to take you. You want to answer this?
If I may skip all the political issue here and ask a major question, with all due respect to the leaders of Israel and the leaders of the Palestinian side, Palestinian partner, or Palestinian non-partner, I don't know.
Well, yeah, it depends who you are.
Yes. Yeah. The question is, what do the people of Israel want? What do they think about the future of this place? Is it the right time to think of a Palestinian state? We don't need him anymore. You go there, you go to your places, we Jews stay here, and you Muslims or Arabs go there. And then the question would be, what about 23% of Israeli Arabs who are living in Israel and they are part of the Israeli state? And the second question is, if we don't go to the solution of a Palestinian state, are we a binational state? Because I think that for the first time ever, you know, everybody was discussing this issue for so many years. People were saying to the Israelis, if we don't build a Palestinian state in 10, 15, 20 years from now, there will be a binational state of Jews and Arabs.
And everybody's talking today about binational state.
This is reality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is reality. This is a binational state.
But
wake up.
Looking at Jerusalem, Jerusalem right now is divided. You cannot even say it. You cannot say the words united Jerusalem. Jerusalem is divided.
Politically, but not financially.
Well,
not financially, I think.
But when we talk about educational system, social security, and so on and so forth, even citizenship, it is divided. In 1984, the Israeli government decided to legislate a basic law, which is known as the Jerusalem United Forever and the Capital of Israel, Jerusalem law. Jerusalem is not united, and Jerusalem is divided. Jerusalem is almost 700,000 people. Almost 300,000 of them do not have Israeli citizenship. They have Israeli residential cards, but they do not have citizenship. Now, the problem is, and yet again, this is crucial. This is a point in time when people said 15, 20 years ago, 2 states or one binational state. This is the time to make the decision.
Yeah, but gentlemen, you know, I want to we are talking about diplomacy and we are talking about Palestinians and Israelis, but it's not Palestinians and Israelis anymore. We are seeing and we are experiencing a wave of violence according to the differences from the race. It's Jews against Arabs. It's Jews against Muslims. This is what we're saying for a long time. Yes, this is what we're saying for a long, long time. This is the war of religion. It's not even if I like you or not as a person. It means that I'm Muslim, you are Jewish, and we're not agreeing, and that's it.
Well, welcome to the neighborhood, because this is exactly what's been going on here. Look at Syria. Look at what's going on in Syria. You know, 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, if you went to a Syrian citizen and asked him, "Excuse me, sir, are you Druze? Are you Muslim? Are you Christian?" he would be very offended. Today, there is no other question. Today, this is a division. Syria is divided. And God forbid, I'm asking the question here, what's going to happen in Israel? Will we become Syria? Or will we become the former Yugoslavia? Or Serbia?
Just before we're continuing this discussion, I want to join to this conversation for an update. Mickey Rosenfeld, the Israeli police spokesman, thank you very much for joining me. What can you update me right now about the current situation? Do we know who the people who perpetrated, who the terrorists are, and from where they are coming?
The investigation into where they came in from and how they made their way into the city of Beersheba and how they were armed with at least one pistol is something we're looking at the moment. What I can confirm is that the area and the building was checked for any further terrorists and there's no further danger. So as far as we're concerned, that terrorist attack is over. We're looking to see exactly who the suspects are. Unfortunately, what we have confirmed until now, both the terrorists were shot, first of all. One of them was shot and killed. The second one was shot and captured at the scene. We've received confirmation from the hospital. One person has been killed, an Israeli man has been killed, and 6 others are still in the hospital, 4 of them being police officers who were injured at the scene of the attack.
Yes, Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you very much for this. we are talking, and I'm sorry that I cut you in the conversation, but again, welcome to the neighborhood, like you're saying. What are the chances that, every time that we've been talking about what is happening in Syria and what is happening in Iraq, and we're saying that this spillover won't get into Israel, and now we're seeing that it is getting into Israel, because at the end of this process, when this whole, let's say, until it will get worse, it will have to be better after this will happen, we will stay here with the consequences, and the consequences will be, again, a lack of trust between Arabs and Jews.
So I have an answer. I hope it's an answer. As long as this conflict is a religious conflict, it will be impossible to solve it. But once we take it from the religious point of view, from the religious anchor, to the political level, only then it will be possible, because let me remind you that in the past it was a political struggle between Israel and the Palestinians. I wouldn't say it was never, but the religious element was not there as it is. It was not dominant.
It was an ethno-political struggle.
But not religious.
Yeah, I agree.
It was not Jews against Muslims. It was more Israelis. It was more Zionists against Palestinians.
But what happened is that the Israelis lost the momentum, and also the Palestinian Authority lost the momentum. And what happened is into the ethno-political struggle entered religiosity on both sides. Let me remind you, the National Jewish Religious Party, the Zionist Party, Jewish Home today, in the former reincarnation Mafdal, was a small part of the right, but it used to sit with the left coalition. The Muslim Brotherhood, and both factions, Northern and Southern, were very small, had very little influence on the political map in Israel 30 years ago. But then, when everything started to fall apart time and time again, both these factions grew in size, grew in popularity, and right now what we're seeing, even though they're not the majority, neither within the Arab or Palestinian side, nor the Israeli side, they set the tone. Because if their leader goes out in front of the TV and goes all out loud on the situation and how the Arabs and the Muslims are bad, or how the Jews are bad, we see the leaders, the other leaders, the center leaders, are not trying to pull the game into the center and calm things down.
Taking it to the right.
Exactly, because they're afraid they're going to lose popularity. Right now, what we're seeing, unfortunately, is a popularity contest. It's like a beauty pageant. Everybody wants to be elected.
I agree totally.
Instead of somebody standing up and saying, this is it.
This is it for both sides.
Yes, I agree.
Yes,
I agree.
I mean, if we had a leadership here in Israel saying to the ones from the right, saying you're not allowed to go to Temple Mount, and at the same time calling upon the Islamic brothers, or the Islamic movement in Israel, and telling them you are not allowed to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque right now. It is closed for everyone. Only if we had this kind of leadership, I think it would be much better for all of us.
Yeah, we already said it before that we don't have any leaders.
There's a problem of leadership.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for having with me this conversation. We are going out. That's it for tonight. Tomorrow we will be here again at the same time, same place from the Jaffa Port, Israel. Have peace. Have a great night.